Welcome to today's webinar. The objectives for our session today are to summarize some of the characteristics and challenges of underserved populations and their risk, describe approaches to identify, recruit, and engage youth of incarcerated parents and migrant workers, identify parts of a successful program model to provide sexual risk avoidance education to underserved populations such as migrant workers' children and those with incarcerated parents. Who are we talking about today? We're talking about youth of incarcerated parents and youth of migrant workers, two historically underserved populations. Why are we talking about these youth? They often have the greatest need for pregnancy prevention information, multiple risk behaviors, trauma, neglect, and repeated behavioral problems. How we're going to accomplish these objectives today is through our presenters, Lynette Tanis, who is a faculty member at Harvard Master of Education School, where she developed a program that incarcerated youth. She's been a delegate of education, researching inequalities in education for incarcerated youth across America and in 5 continents. Our co-presenter today is Bill Hancock, co-founder of Faith Bridge Foster Care. He has won several recognitions, the Goober National Award for Children, National Award for Children and Family. We also have with us today 2 grantees working for the Ridge Project, co-executive director Kathy Tiarini and Alicia Hernandez. They'll be sharing lessons from the field working with these populations. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie, for the introduction, and I'm very excited to be here with you today. Thank you for all that you're doing to help raise awareness, particularly in the area of sexual health for children and youth. I've spent my entire career working with children, and this is one of the most underserved areas. I want to thank you again for being here today. First of all, let me tell you a little bit what I want to accomplish in the time that I have today. First, let's take a look at what is an outreach, recruitment, and retention of migrant worker youth look like. So first, let's begin with a definition. It's easily confused, particularly in publications and many of the news articles around the difference between migrant worker youth and immigrant youth. Migrant worker youth fall into a subcategory of migration and particularly immigrants. And when this subcategory is defined by some very unique characteristics. So let's first come to working on a definition. Migrant farm workers, the parents of many of the children we serve, these are individuals whose principal employment, at least 51% of the time, is in agriculture on a seasonal basis, who have been so employed within the last 24 months. The youth of these families, one of the best definitions we have to work with and most consistent across the literature is really found in the U.S. Department of Education, Title I, Part C and Part A. And they define migrant child, and the term migratory child means a child who is or whose parent or spouse is a migratory agricultural worker, including a migratory dairy worker or a migratory fisher, or who in the preceding 36 months, in order to obtain or occupy such a companion with such parent or spouse in order to obtain temporary seasonal employment in the agricultural and fishing work. The consistent factor, as you can see with this population, is the fact that they are transient and they move frequently, on average about every 4 months, and typically follow a circuit. We'll look at that in a moment. Some of the other characteristics is they work to help support the family. Many of the youth we serve, they're doing it because they want to help family. Many times the way that the migrant workers can increase their income is to have their children working with them in the field. Some of the other characteristics is they have language barriers to overcome. And there are limited resources that are strategically designed for this subcategory. Let's look at a moment at their migration pattern. I spend most of my time in the southeast region of the U.S., and I'm most familiar with the migration pattern from Florida up to North Carolina, Michigan, and back. These families and youth follow the seasons as they work in Florida with the citrus, sugarcane, tomatoes, peppers, watermelons, and then about this time, as we move into the fall, they'll pack up and move north. Right around once they've started back into school, once they're into school and almost settled, it's time for them to leave and follow the work. And they'll move next to North Carolina, where they're working to work the blueberries, sweet potatoes, tomatoes, and apples, and then ultimately up to Michigan, where apples, blueberries, onions, and watermelons, and then after completion, they'll make their way back to Florida once that season passes as well. One of the best numbers that's most consistent for this population is really against the Department of Education, who has identified at least 302,000 children and youth who are eligible for migrant education services in the United States for 2016-2017 school year, according to the recent data for Department of Education. Of those, there's about 28,000 that are out of school youth. The migrant status of women and children also defines some of the unique characteristics of our kids who are migrant workers. They are particularly vulnerable. We'll look at even more of those details with the other slide, but one of the points I want to make here is in one study found that only 42% of female migrant farm workers sought prenatal care in the first trimester of pregnancy, compared with 76% overall. One study found that 66% of migrant farm children migrate with their parents every year. Youth of migrant workers' unique challenges. Migrant farm workers are often an invisible population. That's one of the great challenges of reaching this population is where are they? Many times they're isolated in rural areas, living in farm worker housing, oftentimes located miles off main roads. 57% of all migrant farm workers live apart from their nuclear family members, which continues to further intensify this isolation. So they're not connected in the community in any intentional way, and many of them are also isolated from their family. Another challenge is the barrier to education as children move from school system to school system with the growing season. The logistics are a great challenge as they move across systems. Systems have different record-keeping processes. They have different outreach strategies. But one of the things that is consistent is they have resources, and they are federally mandated through Department of Education, Title I, to serve this population, as well as other state and federal entities like Department of Education, Department of Children and Family Services, and the Department of Community Health. So the logistics is a main barrier, and focusing on trying to create ways where children can more seamlessly transition across school districts, across state lines as they move with the seasons with their family for work is one of the greatest challenges for reaching this population. I'll return in a moment and talk more specifically how we can potentially overcome some of these challenges and barriers in a moment. But now I'm going to toss the presentation over to Lynette.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bill. So good afternoon to everyone. We want to sort of test your knowledge on what you know about children with incarcerated parents. So as you can see on this screen, there are 5 sets of numbers. And so just want to ask you to first think about what might these numbers represent. And then I'll give you maybe about 30 seconds if you could just sort of start typing in the chat for any of these numbers. What do you think any of these numbers represent? So I'm just going to kind of pause, give you about 30 seconds, and then we'll dive into what these numbers actually represent when you think about children of incarcerated parents here within the United States. Teacher in me is always still wanting to be, allow that appropriate wait time. I don't see anything yet in the comments, but we still have about 12 more seconds.
So just as a reminder, you can use the chat box and select all panelists to send your response to, or you can always leave your response in the Q&A box, either or.
Thank you, Megan. All right. So I don't see anything yet, but I'll go ahead and jump in. Okay, there we go. I do see something. All right, so that first number, which is 5 million, someone actually I see did type. The number, the first number is children, second number is people incarcerated. Okay, so we know this sort of topic about, someone said maybe the hours of work. So let me just go ahead and share. So based on a report that was done by the Annie Casey Foundation, more than 5 million children under the age of 18 have experienced parental incarceration at some point in time in their lives. So that's sort of that 5 million piece over sort of the course of their lives that someone under 18 would have experienced. The 1.7 million actually is the number like currently. It's estimated that 1.7 million children are at this time like currently have an incarcerated parent. And so also something to keep in mind. Let's see if there's anything else. Okay, I'll just continue on. And again, so there's one comment about migrant workers. I just want to share that these specific stats are regarding children of incarcerated parents. The 53 actually represents a percentage. So, part of the, I would say the unfortunate thing in these spaces, typically in carceral settings, there's not a lot of consistent research or data sets that are provided. But the Bureau of Justice Statistics in 2010 provided a report that it's estimated 53% of the incarcerated population were parents. So just something to keep in mind. The 13 is also a percentage. I don't see anything for that, but based on a study that was done by the Annie Casey Foundation in 2016, it's actually a policy report that they put out. The title of it is A Shared Sentence, the Devastating Toll of Parental Incarceration on Kids, Families, and Communities. And we actually have the reference here in the slide for you because they provide a scope of looking at all of the states, what percentage of the population are actual parents who are incarcerated. And so this 13% actually represents the state of Kentucky. They had the highest percentage. States like New Jersey actually had the lowest percentage. There's sort of a range of 3% to the low all the way to 13% to the high. So again, if it's something that you're interested in, it's definitely worth checking out that resource later on. And then lastly, 6. There's sort of a times next to this 6. I'll just go ahead and share. I don't see any comments, but I believe your brain, sort of the neurons are going wild in your brains now. So in terms of the 6, children with parents in prison are 6 times more likely to be incarcerated. That's actually a statistic recent in 2020 that was provided. And so I share that with you. Obviously, you know, it's important that we know the data, right? So that we can at least think about how we can approach what we do in a positive way to have a positive impact on these populations. The stats that I just shared with you, they're also here for you as your reference, so please feel free to check them out, especially if there is something that you are that you're sort of interested in and want to kind of delve deeper. All right.
Lynette, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to tell you folks are using the chat feature, and you did get a lot of responses there, and folks were tracking nicely with the answers. So I would remind participants to, on the drop-down menu, if you'll scroll down, select everyone, then the presenters, panelists, and everyone will be able to see those responses for better engagement. But thank you for your answers. I wish you could have seen them, Lynette.
Okay, awesome. All right, thank you, Connie. I was starting to, you know, I was wondering, but it's like, all right, I know the participants are there. So, all right, cool. I'm going to be curious to kind of go back and see those and see how well they align. But again, hopefully, you know, to the extent that you are already familiar with this population, perhaps this is just a reminder of the statistics. For those of you sort of new in exploring this population, you know, my hope is that you heard at least something that further triggers something within you to either further investigate or, again, also just serve as a resource for this population. On this slide, again, just shows the data point for the report that I shared with you, the policy report that came out of the Annie Casey Foundation. So again, the link is there. Please feel free to check that out. So something that I think is important for you to know, again, this is based on the National Institute of Justice, that children of incarcerated parents, they do face profound complex threats to their emotional, their physical, their educational, and their financial well-being. You know, it is a traumatic experience. I think it's really important that everyone recognizing how traumatic it can be. The research shows that it does often lead to depression, to PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorders. There are other mental health needs also that end up existing. And, you know, in terms of the financial impact, when you think about it, if that parent was the sort of breadwinner, as sometimes it's termed, just think about the financial impact that then has on the family. And so, again, just important for us to understand the impacts that happen for children of incarcerated parents. Additionally, just a couple other points that I think are really, really important for you to know is, you know, these are just some of the ways in which having parents who are incarcerated negatively impact the youth. So there's one terminology, maybe some of you are familiar with this, of sort of living in 2 worlds. Some may say maybe they're even living in 3 worlds. For some youth, they want to like keep it to themselves. There's a story of a young man who, at the age of, he was a year and a half old, and his father actually murdered his mother. So he was without his mother because she died, and was without his father because his father was serving 40 years for the crime he committed. And so he recalls, even as a kindergartner, when it was time to make Mother's Day cards or Father's Day cards, he would make 2 sets. And his classmates, you figure 5 years old, typically in a kindergarten class, were like, why are you making 2 cards? And, he didn't go into any detail, but he was actually making them for 2 sets of his grandparents because that's who he spent time with. He recognized even as a 5-year-old, he did not want his classmates to know what happened to his mother and where his father was. And so you kind of have them where, they are, trying to like go to school, do the, right thing, or what they believe is like how people want to perceive them or feel like they should be perceived. But then the other world is, trying to at least have these interactions with the incarcerated parent on very brief phone calls, unfortunately, that happen that are also extremely costly, or even if they have the opportunity to visit. I think it's also really important that many of you know some parents are thousands of miles away, if not hundreds of miles. Some are thousands of miles away. So there's also that cost factor, travel, all of that. And even through all of that, oftentimes it's just a 1-hour visit, and hopefully they do get a chance and there's not a lockdown or anything else that occurred that day. It's just a 1-hour visit. And sometimes it's behind a glass. So it's not even like we can reach out and sort of hug and hold one another. And so they're sort of like juggling those two worlds. In some places, many of the adults don't know what's happening with them, and they kind of rather to keep it that way, not even realizing that that's further sort of hampering any particular progress that could be made if they perhaps did have counseling or other supports. And so unfortunately, that does lead them to, struggling in school. There is the work, I'm not sure if you're familiar with, but a book called Bandwidth Recovery, which talks about, children who have like consistent sort of traumatic experiences. It's almost like our bandwidth, and many of you, especially in this virtual world, have perhaps experienced that. If the bandwidth is low, sometimes there's just too much stress on the systems. Okay, we got to power down, or maybe I won't use my video, I'll just use the audio. It's in the same way when children continue to experience these traumatic events. And a lot of times, children with incarcerated parents, it's almost the same kind of trauma they experience if their parents were divorced or if a parent passed away. And so there is trauma that's there. And having that, it kind of like further impedes on their bandwidth. And so people like you, organizations, those who are there to support, really do provide extra resources needed so that we can sort of free up that bandwidth so that they can live and be free and learn and do all those other wonderful things. So that's also something to keep in mind. Again, they do lack the needed support just because many people don't really know what's happening. And so there is no, especially many of them, children aren't really sure how to navigate this world, don't even know how to ask for whatever resources that might be helpful to them. There are some incarcerated youth who kind of, as they got older, realized, wow, I wish someone even forced me to have a therapy session or counseling, or that there was someone from the outside providing resources to me. So something else to keep in mind. And then just lastly, just in terms of increased risky behaviors. So again, along the lines, even with the trauma, it's just important to understand that many times the symptoms, they go like largely unrecognized. And this comes from the National Institute for Trauma and Loss in Children. And, what ends up happening is the child is trying to deal with this traumatic event. And so it kind of shows up, they are getting involved in like acting out, or they're just like having trouble concentrating, following directions, things like that. And so sometimes you might not even realize what's happening unless you truly know what's going on. But according to researchers back in 2007, it was shown that significant trauma definitely is a predictor of delinquency and involvement in health risky sexual behaviors. So that's also something to keep in mind. Again, an important topic for this population that you all will be serving. And so I look forward, of course, as we continue this conversation, to be able to share some strategies, but at least wanted to provide you with the context for this population.
Thank you so much for that good information, Lynette. I wanted to tell you that there are some participants having conversation in the chat box. There's mention of imagine a community or a neighborhood where there are several incarcerated parents that said that the impact may be greater than what we think. Douglas says that incarceration is baggage that some children can't unpack until much later in life, and just as you said, those maladaptive high-risk behaviors for that population. So if you would, in the chat box, we'd just like to see what underserved youth populations are you serving. So if you would just take this time to drop those in the chat box and let us know, we're going to give just a few minutes for that to take place. And Megan may give some direction on that to those that may still be struggling with that feature. But go ahead and type in, what underserved youth populations are you serving? Okay, it looks like we have some folks, justice impact youth, youth in detention centers. Here's a good point, low income youth, transitional age foster care youth. It looks like we have folks serving some underserved populations. One program says that they're based in the public schools, and so they're interacting with youth in that space. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Alternative high schools, group homes. Thank you so much for your responses. We'll move to the next question. Okay. Okay, good. It looks like several folks are serving these underserved populations. Megan, could you advance the slide for me, please? Talking about low bandwidth. We have some folks serving Native American youth and reservations. Okay, now in the next question, if you would type your answers in the chat box, we'd like to hear, why is it important to reach these youth? Why has your organization chosen to serve these youth, this population? It looks like most folks are serving through the public school. And then we're hearing that because they're leaders that just haven't been given a voice yet. Important skill building for all youth. Lynette, that speaks to the inequalities that you've talked about in terms of education. Another grantee says little or no exposure to healthy relationships and allowing them to see that. Okay, decrease teen pregnancy to break the cycle of prison.
So I see some additional responses about importance to reach youth to help build stronger families because children deserve a voice and they have so much potential. That they are the most vulnerable. So the next question we'll ask you to type in the chat box is, what are some of the most challenging aspects you've experienced when targeting and serving underserved youth in your community? So I see that some of those responses are developing trust, low retention rates. We've had that multiple people submitted low retention rates.
Yeah, the trust piece is definitely huge, as you all are well aware, building those relationships, especially because all that they have encountered.
We're seeing some responses about school buy-ins and family buy-ins, parental buy-ins. Okay, thank you guys for all of your responses. We'll keep moving forward with today's presentation.
And
Okay,
so
now, if you could take over, Lynette. My computer screen is frozen. I apologize. I'm having technical difficulty.
no problem. So based on what you all have shared so far, and I see continuing to share within the chat, which is awesome. So thinking about, of course, the needs for these populations, again, children of migrant workers, children of incarcerated parents, then of course, then it's like, well, in terms of programs, you know, clearly there's a need for programs to have this sort of transformational impact on this population. And so that's what we're gonna really get into next. And so this question that we just kind of posed first to you all is, you know, design for a difference. How can we make a difference for these underserved youth populations? So just in thinking about, for those of you who have already perhaps started programming for these populations, is there anything in particular that you've done that you feel like works really well that you can also just share in the chat so that the other participants or your colleagues can also see what you've done? And then we'll get into some specific examples as well. So is there anyone who's done anything specific to working with children of migrant workers or children of incarcerated parents to sort of help make a difference in working with these underserved populations? Megan, I'm not seeing anything come up, so I'm not sure if
yeah, I'm not seeing any responses to that specific question just yet.
Okay, all right. Okay, so I see now providing consistency, authenticity, meeting them where they are, giving them a confidence boost when it comes to their hopes and their dreams, also very important. Using justice-impacted folks to serve justice-impacted youth, also very important. Just sort of how can we sort of connect with those who have similar shared experiences as we do? Great. Please, again, feel free to continue posting your comments. we are going to continue on with what we have prepared. I'll just share this last two comments that just came up, also by being an ear to listen. So, and that connects with someone earlier just saying like the importance of making sure they have a voice. This population has a voice, so that's awesome. Showing up consistently, very important. And then helping to provide resources for the parents. Again, meeting the youth where they are and meeting the whole needs. And giving genuine, empathetic guidance. That's also really, really important in terms of the ownership piece and taking initiative, that self-agency, so to speak. All right, thank you all for sharing. Again, please feel free to continue to share as you feel led, and we'll continue on. So this was actually similar to what's been shared, you know, as we thought about this presentation with you all today, you know, there's sort of four main pieces that kind of come to mind and how you can make a difference. And one is definitely building the rapport, like truly demonstrating, like showing obviously who you are, if there is a specific story that you have in your own personal space, or sort of like what has brought you into this space is really important. And so them hearing that and knowing perhaps a glimpse of your story and how it might connect with theirs is really important. Just being able to frame a safe space so that people do feel comfortable. There's trust there. That's also really important. And along those lines, that cultivating the trust, as someone commented, just even being consistent. So if in fact you schedule to be there, you know, Tuesday at 10 o'clock, that you're there Tuesday at 10 o'clock, or every Thursday, or whatever it is, like having that consistency helps to cultivate that trust that they can rely on you. That's really important. And just being present, you know, being able to put everything aside, and people do know when you are present in the moment. And so it's really important that you are fully present with them, whether it's virtually in the current world we live in or in person. Additionally, and this is where you'll also hear from the other team members and presenters on the call, we've identified sort of these also sort of four main themes that emerge in terms of how else you can make a difference. And so I'll just start with the first one, which is to collaborate with other youth organizations. I would just say, you know, some of the stories, especially for those of you specific to the children of incarcerated parents, being able to connect with organizations. One is like the Oklahoma Policy Institute, or the Connecticut Children with Incarcerated Parents Initiative. There are others throughout the United States. Being able to like connect with these organizations, many of the websites even provide either a brief video that actually helps you hear the stories of youth who have been impacted by having a parent who is incarcerated. So just being able to, if it's not something you've personally experienced, just to be able to like hear these other stories helps you, one, just it helps you. You are further sort of enlightened. And then also, you know, perhaps just even in terms of empathy and just a better understanding of some of the experiences that occur. So just being able to go to some of these sites are helpful to kind of either read the stories that are shared or listen to the videos. That's really helpful. The other thing is just connecting either with the schools. Sometimes, you know, even the guidance counselor or the social worker, case worker will be able to kind of share this and provide this window for you so that you can help and serve in that way. It could be connecting with parent groups, depending on the state. So, you know, within the United States, just even in terms of like the juvenile justice system, we have approximately 1,500 juvenile facilities, residential facilities, but also like group homes and other things. And in some states that falls under the, you know, Department of Health and Human Services or the Children, Youth, Family Services, but in other states it falls under the Office of Juvenile Justice or the Juvenile Justice Department or the Corrections Department or it's sort of its own district. And so in thinking about that, you can reach out to, the state agency and just even find out where are the group homes or the types of programs that are there, and that could be a way to get involved. Another way is just reaching out to churches or even going through the courts to see how you can be helpful to these populations. And then, of course, just other risk avoidance programs. So that would be one way in which to meet this sort of first need of collaborating with other youth organizations.
And now we'll hear from another panelist.
Hi, my name is Alicia Hernandez. My question, that I'll be answering is employ culturally sensitive approach to your recruiting efforts. I myself am a former migrant, knowing the ins and outs as you go and approach the migrant families. Be sensitive to their culture as you're going into the family. It's not as you're doing your program, don't expect them to be at your school after school. The best thing is probably to go to them, go to the migrant camps, go where they're at. Be sensitive to the surroundings and the culture. As you go and you're helping the different things that they're needing. I guess the first thing I should say, the immediate concern that the families that they're facing is be sensitive what's going on with the families before you do anything. A lot of them are concerned about the food, the shelter, the health care. Take care of those needs before anything, and be sensitive to their culture. It is amazing. Once you identify their need, and then everything else will follow. And then they'll listen to whatever it is that you have to say for your program. One of the things too, what the families are facing, I was out there at the camps yesterday, the fear of harassment of the locals don't want them here. They're thinking they're taking their jobs. A lot of fear as the kids they want to work. They're just here with their families to work. Nothing else. They're just here to work. And as they just want to I'm sorry, that thing came off here. I can't hear. All the families want the kids, all they want to do is just be accepted in the community. And as we are going to these families, migrant workers, all they want is to be heard. They just want to be accepted in the community. They just want to be accepted as they go from school district to school district. A lot of these kids, some of them have gone, by the time they go home from south to north, they've gone already to, some of them, to 21 school districts before they even go home. And dealing with so many things with their peers. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia.
I can't, I was having trouble, I'm sorry.
Okay, and our next presenter for this section believe, I don't know if we have Catherine on. There she is. Go ahead, Catherine.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. Thanks, Alicia. I do want to just do a quick follow-up on some things that Alicia said. I could see that she was having some technology issues, but I happen to know the work that she does. And so one of the things she does that's culturally sensitive approach to recruiting is she goes to the kids. She takes a tent, she takes a cooler full of water on their lunch break, gets the parents, gets the kids, shares with them what she's going to do, and literally makes it so it fits in their schedule so that she's not taking them away from things that they normally do in their day. And that's something that I've seen and I wanted to share because I think it's important to recognize that sometimes you have to go to where they are. And so let's talk a little bit about making programs relevant to the population you serve. I'm specifically really going to talk about children of incarcerated parents because they don't self-identify, and it's not like with our migrant youth, we typically are going to find them with their family. We're going to find them actually on the farm and doing the work. And so if we think about how are we going to identify children of incarcerated parents, they don't always just stand out. Just because a child's struggling in school doesn't mean they have a child of incarcerated parent. Just because they're acting up or truant, or just because they're a straight A student doesn't mean that they don't have a parent that's in prison. They could be struggling in other ways. And so you're going to have children that have incarcerated parents. If you serve in public schools or any school, you are going to be serving children of incarcerated parents. The important thing to know is that they will benefit tremendously from an extra infusion of help and hope. That often they get kind of caught up in these cycles of destruction where they're going between shock and denial, anger, grief, and then around they go again, and they don't know what to do with these feelings because we're, as a society, not giving them permission to grieve, not giving them permission to share and be accepted. So what we decided to do with our model is we were thinking we really want to make it relevant to the children of incarcerated parents in a deeper way to really connect with them. So we began serving the kids with the incarcerated parent at the jail during the visits and connecting with them there, and then building that bridge back into school and community. And of course, not identifying them as, oh, hey, Bobby, yeah, it was great to see you last week in the prison with your dad, but instead covering and protecting them and then giving them that ally, that advocate that they know that, not only is Miss Cafe going to be there in the prison, helping my dad help me with homework and building that family connection. It's just kind of helping bridge those two worlds that Lynette talked about earlier. We hear that all the time. I'm living my life in two worlds. I have the world here with my dad or my mom in prison, and then I have that outside world, and I have to pretend like I'm like everybody else. But that real deep feeling of being a misfit, being discarded. And so helping to bridge that and helping them understand that, their parents' mistakes do not define their parents, let alone them, and that even their own mistakes, their past doesn't define them. It can actually qualify them for the future. And so we really help them focus on the future instead of the current situation. And I think that in making it relevant to them, like, wow, I'm still Johnny who wants to play football. I'm not Johnny, the son of Joe, the dragon slayer who's in prison, right? And so I think as you think about really reaching the population, understanding, first of all, they're going to be in your classes if you're in the school. Second of all, if you want to take it deeper, then for both the populations we're talking about today, you need to find ways and inroads to go to them, whether that's going to the farm and setting up a tent, whether that's going to the institutions and requesting that you have opportunities to recruit and to share during visits, or to set up special family visits where you're literally targeting youth a certain age, 11 to 17, and providing information for the young people and for the parents. And so I think that oftentimes we discard the idea of having specific outreaches to specific demographics and really overlook incredible opportunities to really throw ourselves in front of somebody, a young person who might otherwise just be marching off a cliff. And if it's as simple as us going and showing up to where they are and throwing that lifeline and saying, hey, here's a better opportunity for you. You're full of potential. And we've got some information, some skills, and some things that you can apply to your life, and some resources that will really help you propel your life so that you can reach your dreams. I mean, they're so excited. And I'm going to say that both those demographics, as we've served them, have been probably the most grateful for the opportunity to realize their dreams and their potential and understand how to avoid some of the pitfalls that either maybe they've fallen in the past or their parents have. And so I think that those are really important aspects of reaching these demographics. So thanks, Megan.
Thank you, Catherine.
I want to highlight a couple of things, particularly Alicia and Kathy just mentioned, as I respond to use a model that also engages parents and caregivers in the program, that you're using your strategy for outreach. First, I'll do three things here to address this. One, the chat box raised three questions. I want to respond to that. And B, I want to talk about a very practical strategy of how you can identify resources in your community and gain access on behalf of migrant worker families and youth. And then I'll wrap up this part with some very specific activities that can be used that across state lines, across cultures. We see some very successful models that are doing outreach, recruitment, and retention. So let me start with the chat box questions first. Alicia was absolutely spot on when she talks about going to the camps where our youth and their families or their caregivers, where they live, work, they do everything on those camps, and on those children that are still school age, 15 and under, who are compelled by compulsory rules to be in school. They are in school, but they are most comfortable when they're with their family. As migrant families are very, and we mentioned earlier that they were isolated. There's a detachment that they have with the local community, and their culture is very, very strong promoter of family and community. And so the idea that the go-to strategy that Alicia was mentioning, Kathy reinforced, going to them, which that's where we see across the board effective connection and trust building and being present is to go to them. So first, use a model that has a go-to strategy instead of a come-to-us strategy. That's the first thing. Secondly, when you think about the go-to strategy, when you go to them, you begin to immediately connect with the people in that community. And one of the keys to reaching our migrant workers' youth is connecting with the family. That is one of the core values of the culture, is family. Many of them are very sacrificial in service to their family. That's why they're working so hard, very long hours, and very difficult jobs for little pay. So families got to be a central part. And when you do a go-to strategy and you go in, don't lead with a service or a transaction. Lead with compassion, with a sense of care. I would totally agree with Alicia and Kathy here that migrant worker families are some of the most grateful for people coming out and showing compassion and support for them than I've experienced in my career working with vulnerable and underserved communities. So that is, couldn't highlight that even more as you go out to do your outreach, make it a go-to. Secondly, when we talk about access to services like care, different family services, healthcare needs, educational services, and the internet, to be able to have access to internet, any of those type of services. First thing, models that are being highly effective, they're also using a research approach. They're really doing a simple environmental study of the community where the camp is in proximity located, to the school district primarily, and to look at what other tax-exempt corporations, nonprofit companies that are in the community that are providing services that may not be targeted at these underserved populations. They could be goods and services that are available in the community that you could be a catalyst for to redirect those goods and services towards this underserved population. So you'd be going to them to build the trust and to establish a presence, but also on their behalf researching the continuum of goods and services being provided by the tax-exempt companies in the community. The study can represent both not just the folks that are providing services within the public sector, but also the private and faith-based community sector. I would strongly encourage you to look at 3 models that have been very effective, and that one is Lutheran Services. So look to their model in your community, see what they're doing. Catholic Services, Catholic Charities, and also several local Protestant organizations are also doing a very good job. They're leading with go-to strategies. They're going into communities. They're connecting on basic services and goods that families need, housing, making sure that they have some extra things in their house to the extra measure that they maybe couldn't or wouldn't choose to purchase, healthy foods to just provide healthy foods, being able to go in and make sure they have access to health care as well as the educational services that are entitled to. Lastly, let me just say, once you go in and identify the goods and services and where they are, one of the challenges oftentimes is the community has the resources, but they're lacking a tactical strategy to get those services, those goods and services connected to the migrant worker camps and communities. Speaking with Alicia and getting to know her a little bit, they're really finding the resources and figuring out ways to get them there. Once you lead with those basic felt needs and you're helping provide those extra added things, coming with the educational piece is something that becomes a very natural. Most of the families I work with, one thing we all agree on is they want an education for their children. They would like to see them work out of the fields and not have to do generationally what they've done. So let me just highlight with a couple of slides some very specific tactical approaches you can use. Use a model that engages parents and caregivers in your efforts. Once you're identifying goods and services and resources in your community, maybe some of the nonprofits actually have outreaches, particularly if you're working with some of the school district, community health, faith-based organizations. They may have some strategies. Partnering with them in community building is very sustainable as you think about how you can continue those services, not just for the season, but as they follow the circuit, you can continue to build on those relationships as they return year after year. So use a model that engages parents. Parents are key to help motivate and inspire their kids to learn and to grow. And being part of helping them do that is help them through education, help them look at learning English, or maybe organizing things where they would have events where they could actually work towards their GED and high school equivalency. Connect and listen to parents and focus on their strengths. Try to find a strength-based connection that you can share and give them a chance to succeed early. Some early wins with the family will build trust. Encourage parents to talk about their hopes and dreams for the youth. I said earlier, I don't know of any family that would, if you let them just dream and you give them a safe place to sit and just talk about their children, education is something that's very important to them. Giving them a chance to talk about their children will give them a chance to renew the hope and dream that perhaps their children can get a good education and move forward out of the fields, perhaps. Offer information that will help families understand and listen to their youth's behavior. Youth are challenged sometimes as they go school district to school district with all the complications, and sometimes they fall behind. And actually, some of the students will even say, hey, I've already studied that. So you can help them listen to their kids when they're with all the momentum and the movement really keeps our youth frustrated with, it's not that they don't want to learn, oftentimes they just struggle with social relationships, finding stable peer relationships outside the camps, and connecting in some of the school environments or in some of the social community environments outside of camps. And so coming in and bringing in even other organizations that are youth-centered and family-centered, that you can come in and create opportunities for people to connect together. And by doing so, work with parents to listen to their kids' behaviors as they struggle with so many changes consistently. Help parents cope with some of the challenging behaviors. Parents struggle with kids that at times have some challenging behaviors that are out of the frustration. But make sure if you're listening and you're thinking of bringing in services that are specifically behavioral and parentally focused and challenging the parenting styles, that you're culturally sensitive to discipline and communication. And that's why I would say really connect with community organizations that have bilingual workers that can come in and work, and perhaps they have some resources that you can partner with in order to build those relationships. Help parents understand the impact of traumatic stress on themselves and their youth, that, you know, they live a very challenging lifestyle. It's hard work. It's stability is a challenge to find, and some of the conditions they find themselves in puts a lot of stress on the family. So look at how you can help maybe relieve some of those pressures, just the physical environment that they're working and living and eating in. Talk about the youth's needs and concerns that you can help with outside of your subject matter expertise in SRAE, but look at other ways that you can partner with others to bring in so that you can provide an array of services, which would include SRAE as part of a comprehensive model program approach to reaching and recruiting and retaining this group. And with that, I'm going to turn this back over to Connie.
Thank you, Bill. At this time, we're going to open it up for panel discussion, and we're going to talk about additional strategies. I again would apologize for the technical difficulty. I keep having some freezing up, so I may ask Bill or Lynette to jump in and provide support if they would, please.
Happy to help, Connie.
Thank you. All right, Bill, I think we had this time set aside to ask questions. So if we could take some questions at this point, we'll have some panel discussion. You have some experts in front of you that have worked in this space, and we wanted to include some time for discussion. So I would leave this time open for questions from participants, or if the presenters have additional information around strategies that they would like to share, we'll just use this time to engage actively around strategies to serve this very important underserved population.
That's an excellent idea.
So as a reminder, feel free to submit your questions either using that chat box to all panelists or in the Q&A box. Also, I believe that we have We still have Alicia and Catherine up there. They are. So we have their knowledge and expertise here today too. We did get one question that says, what geographic zones would you say are most hit by phenomenon present?
Well, I'll jump in on, and Kathy and Alicia, please add to this, but all 50 states have some migrant seasonal work, but the top states that are impacted the most would be the West Coast of California. We see a heavy population there, border states or Texas, and the southeast, northeast circuit that I mentioned earlier. But whatever state you're in, you will have a percentage of migrant workers, because keep in mind that they may be not just working in the agricultural, but maybe fishery. And then you also may find some that are working in meat processing as well.
Yeah, and I hope I'm unmuted. Okay, and I would just add to that, in terms of the incarcerated parents, it's sort of mixed, but a lot in the Midwest region. So again, just kind of going back to that policy report that the NEKC Foundation put together, some of the top states, as I mentioned earlier, as you know, Kentucky, 13% of the population are incarcerated parents. Other states like Alaska, New Mexico, Indiana, Tennessee, Ohio, Oklahoma, those states are 10 and 11%. And so those would be the highest.
I would add one resource to that. If you could go to the Department of Labor, U.S. Department of Labor, and they have a geographical national map there that you can find your state, and you can drill down on that state, and you'll be able to see what the agricultural industries are, what the population that's serving there. I will tell you that much of that data is really dated, but it's at least a starting point that you can use, so that you can get an idea of what the industry looks like in your state.
I've had a question in the chat box that is geared specifically towards Kathy, if Kathy is still on. The question is, how does a grantee who is brand new to servicing the population of youth of incarcerated parents, where is the starting point? How do they begin to access those youth outside of the school?
Oh, that's a great question. And so I would look around in your community and, whatever your geographic areas, whatever counties you serve, and see if there are county jails, correctional treatment facilities, prisons, anything like that that's actually connected to the prison system, and reach out to them. Almost all. Now, thankfully, 30 years ago, family reunification was not a priority for reentry, and as people went into prison. But now it is. Almost every state has in one of their objectives is that part of the reunification, part of the imprisonment is that we're going to try to reunify the family and connect the family, because they know that reduces recidivism. So most of the time, those institutions are really glad to hear from somebody that can offer programming that's designed to help stabilize the family in ways that they're not addressing. So I would start there by reaching out saying, hey, I've got this really great positive youth development program that is risk avoidance education, and we'd really like to access the young people of your residents, and I'd like to discuss with you how that could happen. I think that's a great first step.
And I would just say, if you're wanting to target for youth of migrant workers, you can, one of the groups, that, particularly if you want to move outside of the school setting, is contact your local Department of Children and Family Services and get a good sense. They know where those camps are. They know where the children that may be at risk of neglect and may have to have some type of intervention and family stabilization. And if that's the case, if you go and share that you have connection and resources to help, they're often very welcoming to have someone that's particularly local, that willing to be part of a solution that you can be part of. And there again, and they're very engaged in outreach to the community. So there's a very natural link to be engaged in the migrant camps.
Mm-hmm.
A follow-up question to the question for Kathy is along the line of helping address the family needs, what type of family support or family engagement do you get for the youth of incarcerated parents? How would we target the youth for engagement, or the parents of the youth for engagement?
That's another really great question. We have found that the parents are so hungry because they're experiencing this pain. They don't want to see their kids experience the same thing. They're not really sure how to kind of cut that off. And so having resources, again, you know, we do classes where the parents are actually engaged and involved. We do core communication classes for the parents, for parental involvement, so that they really can understand how to communicate effectively and in a healthy way with their with their teenagers especially, but also with their young children. We also have provided in the past, so we do these like family activities, so that's around a learning objective. And so we engage the entire family in something that appears to initially be kind of fun, because it's an opportunity for them to get together, maybe play a game. But then we have different topics, so they have in a jar kind of topics to pull out and kind of talk about. And so the parents then have access to resources that help them become a better parent, like core communication. They can go through the Tyro Youth Program with their child, with their teen, in a prison visiting setting. We also then have separate programs that we address the needs specifically of the parents through job skills, placement, and a network that we have of referrals for, you know, whether it's housing, food, you know, whatever other needs. Because if we don't address some of those other social needs, then it's really hard for anybody to learn anything new if they're hungry and they're homeless, right? And they're stressed about losing their job. So we do the best we can to help. If we can't address those extra needs, then we make referrals around those things. And then we provide that supportive system for them to be better parents and help them parent their children. I hope I answered the question.
Yes, but we have several.
And Kathy, I'm sorry, Connie. I was just going to further add to what Kathy shared. Yeah, so Kathy, I appreciate you sharing that. And even as you were saying that, I was also just reminded of when I would spend time in like Union County Jail in Elizabeth, New Jersey, or Delaney Hall in Newark with the women who really, you know, were very concerned about their children. And, you know, I think one is, you know, even kind of seeing that avenue of either going to or inquiring about either within a church. I know we talked about sort of churches and that involvement earlier, but whether it is like a prison ministries team or something like that, that can kind of have this other outreach of like how we can now support the children of those parents who are incarcerated. And then as you were talking, I also thought about organizations like Angel Tree, for anyone who may not be aware, just there's this overall sort of prison fellowship for children of incarcerated parents who they then provide this sort of like extra sort of emotional support, actual physical support, spiritual support. So there are definitely some organizations, but sometimes it might actually take starting with the adults, the parents who are incarcerated, and then again, building that trust and being able to share what it is that you have to offer for their children.
Yeah, great input, Lynette.
That is fantastic, and that's right where I was going with the next question. Just to extend upon that with some of the questions that we're getting that are around very practical ways to access resources. Now, Lynette, I just heard you mention a resource, and then Kathy mentioned a resource. So folks are really wanting to know where they can access those resources. There's also a question about, is anyone familiar with a resource to help a nonprofit learn Spanish if they're going to target a population? So does the panel have any response to those questions?
Well, I would say this, that First of all, absolutely, you want to learn the language the best you can, but you're going to have the best outcome by hiring somebody who is fluent already in Spanish.
Great tip. And then, Lynette, can you share the resource that you mentioned, Angel? I didn't catch the rest of that.
Yes. So I actually just put it in the chat. I put it to all attendees. I'm not sure if that's the correct. I'm not sure if that's the correct sort of chat box. I put all attendees. Hopefully that's the case. If not, I'll just put to all panelists. I put it in there as a website. And I would just say, just even doing a search for programs for, children of incarcerated parents, just kind of even just putting that into your, Google search or Yahoo search or AOL, whatever search engine you use, Bing, whatever your search engine, you can just put in, programs for children of incarcerated parents. That could be one way in which you kind of come across those. But also, as was mentioned earlier, just sometimes just in reaching out to sort of the Health and Human Services agencies or just going to their websites. It will take some phone conversations, as Bill kind of said earlier. Unfortunately, a lot of data in these spaces is sort of not up to date as we would like, as one would hope, one needs, similar to certain programs, unless they've been around for a while. It's possible that you might not know about something that could be happening even just a few blocks down from you. And so until there's this sort of like what works clearinghouse for this population, part of it is like, yeah, you're going to just have to do the sort of due diligence, the homework, to make this happen. But as you start to kind of find out things, just even phone calls into local churches, organizations, synagogues, and anywhere, and just ask them, are they involved with prison ministries? And that could also just be an avenue where they're learning a bit more about you, the programs you have to offer. And again, a huge piece of this is building relationships. So if in fact you are someone who comes across as authentic, with, a product, a process, a program that you can demonstrate how this can benefit others, people will want to tap into that resource. And so part of that is just making sure how you present yourself is in a way that's like you're basically selling yourself like, oh yeah, we need, and this is free, absolutely, let's go for it. So that's the one piece. But the other piece is, of course, making sure then maybe you call up, make sure that program is still, around, and just making yourself known. You're trying to get to know the organizations as much as you want them to know you. That's really how the partnership starts. So again, part of it is just kind of doing a search. Others is actually just following up with a phone call to see how you can get involved.
We have another question that, Bill, I think might be one that you would field is, now that you've stimulated the conversation about partnerships within the communities, and we've talked about resources, I now received a question in the chat box about scaling. So you reach out to community partners and you begin to have those conversations. How do you scale? Can you give quick tips where grantees could then scale to meet that need?
Yes, boy, what a great question, and thanks for asking that one. The key to scalability is thinking systemically, think systems, not products and programs solely, but know your product, know your program, know your value, then know your community's continuum of care. Figure out where you fit in there and where your strengths in that system are. Know what you deliver, and then understand the current system. And that's just doing, as Lynette has said, a simple internet search on outreach to migrant workers, children, youth, and you can put in your state and county, and you'll find what's there. And reaching out again to the Department of Education, reaching out to the Department of Community Health, and reaching out to the Department of Children and Family Services. They are key. They have local data that could be very helpful, but more importantly, that's an opportunity for you to build peer-to-peer relationships within the service delivery system and be able to advocate for the population and your services at the same time, and the impact there. The last thing I would say about that is build relationships, build relationships, build relationships. Go everywhere you can where these key stakeholders gather and talk about the community, the county level you're in, and know that you're part of a community system of care, and begin to think systemically, how do I fit in that space? What is our space? And how do we add value to all the other caregivers and service providers? And SRAE are very unique, and what you bring is unique and it's needed. And I love the Lynette's part on it, and it's free. So you're able to bring it in, and you're like, we're funded. We just want to bring this in. We just want to be part of serving this community. So those two things: do your research, think systemically, build relationships.
Another question we have, before I open it up again, to just say general questions. If any grantees have those, please drop those in the chat box or the Q&A. Again, I've received another one privately here that is around one of the bullet points about respecting the culture and physical context, not just of migrant families, but all underserved populations that you serve. So is there a panelist that could speak to that? What are some good tips for really respecting the culture and learning about that from a relational sense?
So I'll just jump in real quick. I would just say, you know, especially if it's a population that you're serving that you really have no knowledge about, or all you know perhaps is like in your heart, you want to serve this population, that's necessary. That's very important. But if you don't really know much about that population, just being able, again, especially now, you know, with the internet and just having so many resources, there's so many even just short videos. You can just listen in to the stories of these populations so that you just have a sense. Again, it's very important that we don't make assumptions that like every person of color thinks this way, talks this way, that is how they experience it. In the same way of like, oh, well, they came from, you know, they're from Oklahoma, or this must be their experience. It's important that we don't box anyone in, kind of check our own sort of biases implicitly or not. But I would say one way is just to see how you can just, again, read some articles about this particular population, these populations. The more stories you can learn before you enter will be helpful so that you don't end up sort of like tripping up yourself just because it's just something you've never experienced before. Your intentions may be genuine and pure, but if your actions don't match, it's gonna be a stumbling block, and it's hard. You can always recover from a stumble, but it's really hard if you don't set the right foundation up front. So those are sort of my 2 cents on that.
Could I add just one thing to that, Connie? The idea that is so profound. The idea that we come into the community as a learner, and you start at doing the search in your due diligence just around knowing who are the stakeholders, who are the people that are engaged in that population you want to serve, knowing who they are, and then identifying, and then going to them and listening. Ask great questions. Go with them with a list of questions to learn about how they're serving the population, how they're reaching them, some of the challenges, some of the questions we're actually raised here. Go ask them how they are, what are some of the challenges, what are some of the barriers. And by listening, you're learning, but also as you become a citizen researcher and you're really authentic in wanting to understand, and that lends a lot of credibility to people who are working with that population. You gain a lot of trust just by coming in and showing a genuine interest in what they're doing. And that also promotes good relationships. And I just saw someone post, relationship building is key on all levels across the spectrum of services. It is absolutely the key. Start with relationships, be a learner, and don't lose sense of the heart and mission and vision of your organization and what you bring in value.
I would tag on to that, Bill, if Alicia is still with us. I know she was having some technological difficulty, as was I, in being able to communicate, but I've heard Alicia talk about going to where the migrant workers are and engaging with them socially first to build trust and relationship before bringing the program in. I've heard her talk about bringing bottled water and different things like that to engage from a relationship standpoint first. And so that's a great strategy, and then making those connections that way, being a learner within that community. Did I get that right, Alicia?
Yeah, absolutely. You got to understand it and sit and eat with them, and also, you know, go to the dad. Hey, you know, is it okay? Who's the boss there? If it's grandma or dad, get the blessings and go from there.
And that's a very important point as we're dealing with youth, is always getting those appropriate permissions and making sure that access is with parental consent. So that's good. We have just a moment or two left if folks would go ahead and like to continue to ask questions. Panelists, I would just thank you for your willingness to have an open forum like this so that folks can get their questions answered. I think this is valuable networking time with experts. Kathy, this question is geared more towards you, but I would say that any of the panelists could answer, and I suspected we might get this one given the current situation that we're in with COVID-19. There's a private question in the private chat here. How do we access during this virtual environment, and particularly with migrant workers that may not be making the move across the country geographically? How do we access virtually?
That's a great question. So Alicia primarily works with the migrant workers, but I can talk a little bit about technology, and especially the fact that the gap is getting larger because of the technology. So before it was like, you know, everybody was going to school, and so there was still the gap, but now it's been exacerbated by the lack of technology and internet access. So for children of incarcerated parents, we're using the technology to the institutions to reach out to the parents and let the incarcerated parent know, hey, we've got all these resources that can really help your son, your daughter throughout this. And then we're connecting with private foundations and donors, corporations. So if we have 10 dads and 7 moms that say, hey, I really want, and my child would be very interested in connecting, but you know, they don't have internet access, or they don't have a computer, they don't have any way to access. We first say, okay, what school district are they in? We check and see, okay, does a school district, is somebody doing something there to get them this technology? If not, then we say, okay, you know, let's reach out to one of our donors and say, hey, you know what, we need a hotspot, we need a computer, we need the prepaid hotspot for the next 6 months, and that way we can get this child engaged in learning, even though that they don't really have the necessary equipment on their own and they're not in school. And so those are resources and things that we've done. As far as the migrant community, they're out there. I mean, Alicia is at the camps. COVID is not locking them down. These kids, these families are there. So Alicia, you want to talk about whether you've had to change anything with COVID in reaching the families that
here in Ohio, we have the Ohio Migrant Education. So we collaborate with the recruiters, and they are providing the hotspot, the internet for them. So we're making it happen.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. We are out of time, and we would say thank you to all the participants that stuck with us through a few of the technological glitches that we had. I'm sure you don't have that in your programs as you're trying to implement virtually. Seems to be the new world, but we really appreciate you participating. And I just want to say thank you again to our presenters and our grantees that shared so openly about their programs and gave tips and strategies. We hope you found it valuable. There will be the post-webinar survey. We would encourage you to complete that. Here is the contact information for the presenters. And again, we thank you. Any closing remarks, Megan?
No, Connie, I think you covered everything. Again, just a thank you to our presenters, and thank you all to our attendees for hanging in there with us today. We hope you got some great content out of this webinar, and we look forward to talking to you soon. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you, guys.